Time is often the enemy of all of us. We have a finite amount of it, and we never quite know when it's going to run out. In the Pantheon community, time is often what can create division amongst an otherwise fairly united community, causing people who were once optimistic and excited to be perhaps more pessimistic or cautious about the future of Pantheon. Often these hopeful supporters and skeptical supporters can clash within the community, even when, for the most part, individuals from both sides have the same or similar goals/hopes with the success of Pantheon. Whether hopeful or skeptical, we all have various levels of patience which can shift us from one group to the other within the drop of any critical news. This clash can divide us in the community and often puts us against one another, which is something I have seen as a rather poison pill for what otherwise is a very impressive community. In this video, I hope to talk about some major key events in Pantheon's development, while taking a look at reasons to be hopeful and reasons to be skeptical. It is my belief that both skeptical sides of the community and hopeful sides possess very important pieces of the puzzle, and if we can listen to those who are perhaps unlike us across a variety of topics, then we can solve some of our own concerns and be more united. Obviously, this one video may not change everything, but it is my hope that if even one person who listens to this can reflect and turn something into a respectful discussion, then perhaps we'll start igniting a different way we react with one another. Pantheon Plus. So you may be asking, why is this a topic that I would like to address? You may say that it's not as fun or free-spirited as discussing classes, MMORPG gaming systems, or big news stories, so why waste my time? Well, it's because since the day Pantheon Plus made their first post in the Pantheon community, it was done because of our belief in the phrase community matters. And as I sit back and watch some of the division coming into our community, whether on Reddit, Discord, or other social media platforms, I often scratch my head and I wonder why. First, let me admit, without some self-discovery of the things that I've been doing wrong, for example, incorrectly labeling some of the skeptic views in the community as, quote, wrong or uneducated, then I probably wouldn't be making this video, which, due to the nature of the topic, may even create some division unintentionally. It was just that, by chance, I had been studying cognitive diversity for a leadership project at work, and a lot of things really clicked in my head. So while building growth in this leadership trait for my full-time job, the first thing I could think of when discussing this topic and digging in was the Pantheon community. In particular, one video I watched really stood out to me, and it was a discussion with best-selling author Matthew Said. Now, I'm probably saying his name wrong, but you all know I do that quite a bit. The link to his video will be in the description below. The video was titled Pursuing Cognitive Diversity, and while I'll spare everybody going through the great depth of what he discussed, he did discuss some important diverse thinking, which is imperative to solving critical issues or in-depth challenges. I want to paraphrase perhaps the biggest takeaway from all of this. Matthew basically states that we're all attracted to people like us. It's in our human nature. And when attempting to overcome simple issues, usually solving a simple issue with a simple solution is really not requiring of much thought diversity. However, as complexity increases, when we only surround ourselves with people like us, we often cannot find the correct answers, without a more diverse think tank, so to speak. He went on to say that when people mirror our perspective back at us, we as humans feel like we're smarter because of it. In a way, we find validation in our thinking, in our overall worldview. Once again, for a simple task or challenge that faces us, there's not much danger in this. However, as complexity increases, usually a single brain with little diverse thought surrounding it is not sufficient enough to solve these more in-depth problems, as a singular thought pattern sort of lacks the ability to uplift, which is provided by collective intelligence. He wrapped up this thought by saying that when this occurs, we are often surrounded by people that think just like us, and because of this, we become more confident in a solution or a thought process, which actually could be gravely mistaken. He also talks about our basic human nature to want to be right. And when we surround ourselves with like minds, sometimes referred to as echo chambers on the internet, we begin not to care if the right answer is factually correct. If we believe it greatly enough, then we're so confident in our answer due to the support we gain around us. Then we begin to dismiss the counterpoints of any given situation because we're overly confident in our own knowledge. Then we ultimately accept falsities as truth. I reference this because this was the key point in helping me start my process of overcoming my own self-bias towards the more guarded and skeptical approach that the way Pantheon is being developed. Make no mistake, I'm not pretending that I've crossed over from being a very optimistic supporter of Pantheon to taking on more pessimistic traits. But now, I'm starting to understand the viewpoints at least a little bit better. Before we get into breaking down some key moments from both sides, there's one thing I want to make very clear. In any scenario, there are always actions or behaviors that are so far to one side that they stop actually representing the true intent of that side of the argument. I refer to these commonly as edge cases. Now, to explain further, the edge case for someone who's more hopeful is that those who don't educate themselves but blindly follow something that they're passionate about, pushing away any negativity at all. In this case, the hopeful or optimistic influence thought process is well beyond that of a normal hopeful individual, and in fact is something damaging to this side of the discussion, as the opposing viewpoint will often label them as white knights. On the edge case of the skeptical individual, or someone who may have more pessimistic traits, they can sometimes be so angry or so frustrated that they don't rely on the facts, but just badmouth others and spew negativity at a high level, disregarding anything that could factually prove them wrong. This type of edge case is often angry by the happiness of others and is often labeled as toxic or a troll. Now, the reason I bring these up is because while a hopeful and skeptical person may have opposing views, it does no good for either side to jump to conclusion and edge cases to define one another as a white knight or a troll. These two types of individuals are often the vocal minority within these two thought groups, and jumping to label people with these phrases often degrades the conversation and leads to hurling insults instead of learning from one another. That's why I think it's so important to see value in both the educated hopeful and the educated skeptic and what they bring to the table when discussing some of the biggest challenges that face Pantheon. Being able to listen without jumping to stereotype edge cases can help us all build our cognitive diversity and all become better for it, while bringing us together instead of pushing us apart. So with all that said, let's take a look at how a skeptical and a hopeful look at various incidents around Pantheon's development differently to try to hopefully understand both sides. Now, topic 1 is crowdfunding. Now, in 2014, Pantheon failed to meet its Kickstarter goal, which led to taking direct pledges via their website and also scrapping a lot of its original Kickstarter pitch. I bring this up because Pantheon is crowdfunded, and it brings a lot of baggage with that due to the nature of crowdfunded games, or even crowdfunding in general. In 2020, a study from Statista showed that the success rate of any Kickstarter, not just games, is only about 38.21%. You can find a link to that article below. However, even succeeding with Kickstarter does not really mean the project is also a success. Furthermore, sometimes crowdfunding in general can be very misleading. There's an article by Variety, which will be linked below, and a quote in there from Fig.co founder Justin Bailey, who broke it down like this, quote, "Many times crowdfunding goals themselves have been manufactured to appeal to the press and generate a secondary beat of overfunding and have little correlation to the actual budget." Now, please note, I'm not speaking on this to the overall community of crowdfunded projects, and not really directly to Pantheon. But you can see that even though Kickstarting and crowdfunding was built on the premise that companies can get away from the evil executive villains that are known to crush all free thinking and only care about the almighty dollar, there's still a push to entice the community to gain success with the Kickstarter projects for that same exact reason. More directly, the MMORPG fan has really been hit hard by overpromising and underdelivering, or not even delivering at all. We can see this in games like Star Citizen that has reached $339 million, but still seems to be pushing more and more for stretch goals rather than completing and delivering a base game experience for people to begin their journey. So let's look at the skeptical discoverer or seasoned fan. Now, they can really look at the overall theme of kickstarting and results of crowdfunding and easily make a case that crowdfunding fails, especially when a game like Star Citizen still doesn't have a base game made for its players to start adventuring in their world with the massive amount of money they've been able to raise. In combination with the fact that Pantheon fans came from the EverQuest community originally, that some of them have already felt the burn of EQ Next being cancelled in 2016, and that sparked a lot of hope that they'd see a new EverQuest game. And might I add, a game that also ignited my hopes for a new EverQuest experience as well. That's not even mentioning those whom were a part of the hype for Vanguard, which was supposed to be the next great Brad McQuaid project. It's important to understand why fans of Pantheon can be skeptical of crowdfunding, and also Pantheon's need for more funds to speed up the process. With Visionary Realms talking openly about needing to find a strong investor or even a publisher, the writing is in the sand that the money is needed for the game's development cycle so it doesn't become too long, so much so that the game is forgotten. Not to mention that the games out there generating bad press like Chronicles of Valeria, who seemingly pulled a fast one with their community, has been damaging the trust of crowdfunding for MMORPGs as a whole. On this topic, being skeptical is extremely justified. Now let's move over to the hopeful discoverer or hopeful season fan. Now they approach this topic a little bit in a different light. Speaking from the experience, a huge reason why I backed Pantheon was due to the issues that occurred with Vanguard. Brad's vision and goals for that game were ruined by publishers pushing to get the game out the door before it was ready, something that would ultimately doom the game. This is why I believe the push for crowdfunding Pantheon was ever an idea in the first place. If it was Brad's belief that had it not been for rushing Vanguard out, it could have been the game that he envisioned releasing to the world, rather than the mess it launched. It's hard to say that that would have been 100% the case, as there were issues around the game was built in some ways, but ultimately people who stuck around for a more playable Vanguard experience enjoyed the game greatly, even though it was short-lived. Those fans were obviously let down with what happened with Vanguard, and Brad's next step in his MMORPG legacy essentially. But they'd be given a new life by Pantheon, even more so than the EQ fan because now it wouldn't be up to a publisher to force the game out when it wasn't ready. This would lead to a lot of the community standing behind the phrase, "when it's ready," so that we didn't experience the same letdown as before. This, quote, "when it's ready" approach really rings true to me, and other members of the Pantheon Plus team as well. Out of Theric, Drac, and myself, I've been following the game the least amount of time, whereas Theric has followed since the Kickstarter. Yet even with those time differences in waiting, the uniting factor is we want the game to be right, no matter how long it takes. Now we're not naive enough to think the game can survive in development forever, but at the current progression rate, and with what we're seeing, we're still heavily behind the "when it's ready" tagline. When there are pitfalls with crowdfunding and what they can mean, the reverse side in looking at what it can do if it's successful, no matter how rare it might be, is worth fighting for us who are more hopeful to get the right game out. Even when Pantheon gets an eventual investor, this time spent crafting the core values of Pantheon, well, they'll be meaningful. So let's jump to topic number 2. This was the passing of Brad McQuaid. Moving forward from the loss of Brad McQuaid in 2019, this was a huge blow to the community as his name and his connection to EQ brought many loyal followers into the Pantheon community, and many could argue that it was even their reason for donating to the project in the early days. Now the skeptical follower here could easily say that this was something VR cannot recover from. Losing the person who was seen as the visionary of the game and had a huge part in raising the proper funds to continue the development of Pantheon is too much to a small studio, some could say. Some could even say that without Brad guiding the spirit of the game, the Pantheon may end up changing or not being the same game they had hoped for. Losing a well-known figurehead, for example, is a lot for a company to handle, let alone a smaller indie team who relies so much on one another. Now the reverse side of that is the hopeful follower, who looks at this tragedy in a much different way. Watching Visionary Realms push forward, realign, and stand tall against even such a great loss was extremely admirable. Not only once with Brad, but again with a very cherished member of the team in Molad. If the game were to have folded at this point, in the point in which they had lost Brad, nobody would have blamed them. Well, not at least the way people look at Chronicles of Valeria or EQ Next. Tragedy can be a moment which really shows the true character of a company, of a vision, or of a project. I saw the team picking up the pieces, and furthermore, Joppa stepping forward in front of the camera to address the community as the new figurehead was an amazingly courageous undertaking, one that spoke volumes to the heart and soul of the small group at Visionary Realms. This was possibly one of the biggest losses the company could have had at that time in development, and the team held strong, became tighter, a tighter, well-oiled machine over the next few years, instead of crumbling under such great pressure. I find great value in how an individual or company react to difficult times, and Visionary Realms proved a lot with how they responded to this tragic moment. Let's move on to topic 3, which is what I dub the 3 time periods of Pantheon. Now, for those who have followed the development of Pantheon since the Kickstarter days in 2014, they have seen 3 distinctly different phases of development, in which major decisions were made. Most of the Kickstarter plans were scrapped, as I believe the quote was nearly 90% of what was presented as quote-unquote Pantheon for the Kickstarter was scrapped and reworked. This would materialize on what people would then see in the first teaser trailer, Bring Friends, and the surrounding live streams, in which would mostly be represented showing off pre-alpha phases 1 through 4. Finally, we would then take the current state of the game, coming off the heels of what was dubbed Project Fairthale, which would involve a reworking of the game's code and a large-scale drop of Unity store assets in order to enhance the development speed and future viability of the game. So, the skeptical members of the community can look at these phases and really summarize some reasons or concern, especially if they've been around from the early starts of pre-alpha phases. News that was released would often point to upcoming finalizations of zones in those days, pushing towards alpha. However, with the details released around PA5, it was worded in a way where VR sort of said that they expected that the Unity assets would not be something used, eventually for the release of Pantheon. And this felt kind of counterintuitive to the information that was provided in the game's developmental progress. These conflicting messages, as well as now seeing what some could view as 3 different starts for the Pantheon development, can be a reason to have doubt in the development timeline. Add in the need for more funds being spoken to quite frequently, and watching what has happened from the outside with Chronicles of Illyria once again, putting out bad press and treatment to their crowdfunding supporters, it's not hard to feel worried where progress is seemingly going backwards. The hopeful members of the community, however, would look at this very differently. VR had a very difficult but important decision to make when it came to recoding and changing the course for PA5. It was a decision that they knew would cause concern in the immediate time frame, but one that would cause much more concern if they had not addressed it at all and pushed forward towards alpha, or even closer to launch with a coding layout that wouldn't work for the future of the game. Difficult decisions, especially when you have to admit mistakes and step backwards, are not easy to make. And some companies avoid these moments to even put band-aids on these situations instead of resolving them. VR did the right thing, even though it was the hard thing, and would push alpha back a bit, especially now that the team has stated development is moving along at an extremely faster pace with the changes that have been made. Let's get to topic 4, which is communication and transparency. Now, kickstarting and crowdfunding have been discussed earlier, and they bring with it a large variance in expectation from the community in regards to communication. There are sides that feel that communication needs to be more frequent and more transparent due to seeking donations in order to make the game successful. And there are some that feel that too frequent communication takes away from development time. In the case of Pantheon, they've attempted to change their cadence of communication with the community multiple times, trying to get it right for everyone, which is often impossible to do. Visionary Realms has gone from monthly written newsletters in its starting years to a bi-weekly live developer stream on Twitch to a monthly live developer stream with now a combination of a monthly producer's letter. Adding pieces like website redesign, forum communication, Twitter, and Discord discussions, as well as a monthly roundtable/podcast with community manager Kilson. Now, on the surface, it feels like VR is doing a lot to communicate. There's been a lot of issues, however, in gathering information as a casual follower to the game, and at times even for the most devoted follower. In October's developers newsletter, VR acknowledged the need to be more transparent in general, and more consistent with communication and getting the information to the community which is seeking it out there. And they did so by opening up about the decisions to refactor the game during Project Fairthale, explaining why PA5 looks so different than PA 1 through 4. Now I'm going to quote the newsletter directly, and this is what producer Ben Dean had to say on this topic. Quote, "We know that there has been a great deal of confusion around Project Fairthale and Pre-Alpha 5. We did a poor job at communicating the nuances and the amount of work that was needed to get us on the workable state that we are now in, which has left you in a long period of wondering what was going on. We can't undo that, but we want to do better going forward. So our deepest, sincerest thank you to those who have stuck through it. And to those of you who believe in us and have never wavered or have wavered, we hope that through our actions, we can earn your confidence again. We're crazy excited about where we are right now. Amazing things are ahead, and we want to share this experience together. After all, taking the journeys with friends. Isn't that what Pantheon is all about? End quote. Now, a skeptical fan has the right and is justified in looking back and seeing the attempts to clear up communication in the past, yet acknowledging that the issues with communication still stand. A huge part of accepting the communication of VR comes from trust, and the skeptical fan can look at the fact that it's taken so long to talk openly about the refactor and say, well, why wait so long? There is justification in feeling like this. While never lying to the community, there were a lot of important details on development that were sort of hidden, which had huge impact on the developmental process. With the long drawn-out process to get the website where it is, while still having many features missing, the skeptical fan can also look at this and say that all pieces of communication take just too much time to produce, and often it's too difficult to navigate through and find the correct answers. It can be understood that this type of a follower needs to see the change, not just hear about it. They want to trust VR. I do truly believe that. But the past attempts to correct the issues have yet to materialize, and they need tangible proof to be able to move in the new direction on this topic. The hopeful fan also wants more information, but is perhaps a little more understanding of the difficulties the small team has when they are split into different tasks. The hopeful fan is happy to get any information they can, and often looking forward to getting together for streams or discussion even around the smallest details. The hopeful fan appreciates the honesty shown in the October producer's letter, and although perhaps they would have liked to hear it earlier, they just subscribe to the notion that better late than never philosophy. The hopefuls trust in VR, even through the mistakes and missteps, because as stated earlier, their focus is on getting Pantheon made, quote, right. Much like watching the team rebound from the passing of their team members, the hopefuls see the value in Visionary Realms being able to make hard decisions which play into the betterment of the future for Pantheon. It's not so much what causes you to fail, but more so what you learn from it, and what do you do with that information. Transparency, whether late or at the time of an issue, is important and difficult to do at times for a company that does not want to let their fans down. So let's wrap this whole situation up. While there are way many more polarizing topics to discuss that cause these two attitudes to differ or at times clash, these four signify important details related to the development of Pantheon. Neither the hopeful fan nor the skeptic are wrong in how they feel, and both are passionate and caring fans that want to see the game succeed. They simply have a different methodology on how to interpret the information given, and have a different set of expectations on what processes are used to most effectively drive Pantheon to release. It's also important to note how many people are skeptical on one topic, yet they can be hopeful on others. It's not as simple as saying that there's just these two types, as there are so many in-betweens, and also those that are way outside the lines as discussed earlier as edge cases. The whole point here is to understand that anyone who devotes time to commenting on Reddit, Discord, Twitter, or any other form of social media around Pantheon is spending a very valuable resource in doing so: time. Regardless of the level of patience, trust, and understanding, spending time means that all of these types of fans care. And if we can unite around this understanding about one another, then we can unite in being better listeners, being more inclusive of one another, and having thoughtful debates that can not only help build the community instead of divide it, but maybe even be a big part in helping Pantheon itself succeed. As I stated earlier, I fell victim quite often to falling into my own side of thinking without understanding the credibility of the other side. Working through this has been very eye-opening for me, and it's even helped me to forge some new relationships, which I may not have otherwise had. To me, that's exactly what community matters means, and why I felt this was so important to put out there to the community. I encourage everybody to reflect a bit, the way I have, to help make our community stronger and stop some of this needless division. Cognitive diversity says in a nutshell, leave yourself open to learn. Never be too confident that you have the sole right answer, and understand that situations can be interpreted in many ways that are all correct. Someone who thinks differently isn't your enemy. They're a key to unlocking more knowledge and empowering your own level of knowledge and experience to further tackle complicated or complex issues within our community. Don't let yourself get caught in the noise of those edge case groups either. Don't let people ruin your thoughts on others who are often grouped in the same side but maybe not so radical. In a society so hell-bent on dividing us, our community can be better than that. Both sides have a way to go in understanding one another, but those in the middle have it figured out. And the more we can pull into that group, the stronger we will all become. Thank you everybody for checking out this video, and hopefully it can help create a new discussion point to pulling us together and resolving some of these things that worry us. Until next time.
Pantheon.